with Plato and our Western civilization's idea of Atlantis, it's kind of been filtered down over time by academia, and now they kind of just say, "Oh, well, it's just an allegory," or something like that. But when
Yeah.
you really look at the details given by Plato, I mean, to say it's an allegory is kind of like just shows that they don't know Plato that well, because when he's writing an allegory, it's kind of obvious compared to when he's not, right? So I mean, that just to me proves that they're being sort of they're not being genuine, they're being disingenuous, I'll say. But anyways, yeah, Plato is definitely like where a lot of the buck stops with Atlantis for people when they hear that, when they get the academics version of Plato. But there's so much more to Plato than what we're told in our average, civics class. So
A Kodega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with a Kodega and sharing one of yours. Click that like. If you're new here, subscribe and have the bell hit for notifications to stay up to date on all of the new content. In 360 BCE, 360 BCE, Plato wrote two works. And in those two works, he described a seafaring nation, a naval empire that controlled the Western world, that was the known Western world, and this naval empire um, had attacked ancient Greece, ancient Athens, actually. They were defeated, not Athens, but the empire was defeated, and they were sent back to their home. Now, upon this, they lost favor with their deities, and as we know it, sunk into the oceans. What I'm talking about is Atlantis. For those of you who don't know, this is a fabled story. It could be an allegory, it could be a fairy tale, or to some of us, it could be the real thing. Now, I tend to believe that Atlantis was a real place. It was talked about by Plato. He was told about it. And I believe that a lot of signs point to this actually being a legitimate culture, legitimate civilization. So, everyone, my name is Rai. I am the Codega, and this is the Codex of Curiosities. These are some of the topics that we go over, we jump, we take on, and we talk about this. We talk about everything from high strangeness to conspiracy theories to lost, stolen, forgotten history. That seems to be something that I really am getting into. Also, the Nephilim as well seem to be coming up quite strong. I just find it really interesting, especially that this information seems to be being withheld to us. And whenever anything is withheld, real information, I tend to go after it and go dig for it and go dig deeper. And I believe that we all are entitled to this wisdom. Tonight's guest, Mystic Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. I talked to him when I was the host of the Lost Frequency podcast, and now I got him on Codex of Curiosity. So, without further ado, before I get there, just a couple quick little bits of housekeeping. Everyone, I want to say thank you so much for supporting the show. It means the world to me. So you continue supporting the show any way that you see fit. I appreciate that. I've made some new shirts. Check them out. I think they're cool. My podcast, my YouTube channel. I'm on all types of platforms. So come check me out. And call to action: share the show with some of your friends. And if you actually, you know what, this is something new I wanted to try. I'd love if you guys can give me a drawing of the Codega. I'm asking my viewers and listeners. I'm going to say lures, mixing up listeners and viewers, to draw what you believe the Codega looks like, and then submit it to me at the Codex of Curiosities at gmail.com. And we'll showcase your drawings, and I think I'll get a prize for the one that gets the most votes. So with that, let's bring on Mystic Mark from the podcast My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. All right. Mark, welcome to the Codex of Curiosities.
What's up, Rye? It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to join you again on the new show. It was a pleasure to have a talk with you on lost frequency. And after the introduction, I'm completely filled in and I know exactly what the Codex of the Codega is. I had no clue that the Codega was a type of entity or like a role or
It, it
maybe
was
even
it was a profession. It
profession
was
of
a
some
yeah, it
kind.
was a job in Venice, Italy, where they would hire this person who would walk around and escort the people, um, providing protection and filling in on stories and whatnot. He'd protect them from thieves and criminals and ghosts and demons as well. And he would sometimes a good Codega would pass on stories and also in turn listen to other people's stories. And of course, by doing that, building up his codex and just a collector of stories and wisdom.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, I love it. I'm glad to be back. Happy to talk to you again. And if this show makes its way onto my feed for all my listeners, please go and listen to the show wherever you listen to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast because we're in all the same places. So I'm going to make sure the link is all there for people so they can go and support you and follow you on your audio journey. But sick intro, great way to get things kicked off. So if you want me to jump right into it, I imagine
I'd love to.
there's not much of a need for an introduction on who I am. People can go and listen to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast to learn more about what I do. But today we're going to be talking about my hypothesis as far as Atlantis goes, the let's say the potential that Atlantis is a location that is still within reach today, right? So the remnants of Atlantis are in North America. I firmly believe that. A lot of attention has been put on the oceans. There are Atlantean, let's say, ruins or megalithic sites underneath a certain degree of water, but I think that we often kind of think like, "Oh, well, Atlantis was sunk under the sea, so it must be only under the ocean," and that's where the entirety of Atlantis is now, it's underneath the ocean. I personally believe that Atlantis was more like, and this is not just based on, me sitting around dreaming, like, based on what I've read and researched, it's fair to conclude that Atlantis was a global civilization during its time. Now, that word Atlantis that we have, to my knowledge, comes from the Greeks by way of Plato and was a sort of translation from what the Egyptians shared with the Greek culture when Greece and Egypt had a sort of fusion of their cultures. And one of the famous things that was said to Plato by a man named Solon, and this might have even been like Plato's like great grandfather or whoever originally got the story from Solon and passed it down to Plato. I don't know if it was Plato himself. It might have been. And then in that turn, then Solon would have had inherited this information for generations. But either way, there was some sort of chain of events. It wasn't like a clear Plato talked to Solon and Solon knew everything. This was like an old story. And at that point in time, Solon said, "You Greeks are just children compared to us Egyptians in the grand scope of how long we've existed on the earth and what we know about the history of this place." So that should take everything we know about Western civilization and shrink it down into a smaller lens. Because I think at this point in modern history, with everything we've gained from Western civilization, it's easy for that to sort of eclipse everything else. And we tend to think in terms of like, well, progress moves in this linear direction that we've kind of reached the ultimate of. And the further in the past you look, the less progress you see, right? Well, whenever Atlantis comes up as a topic, one of the big realizations or revelations, sorry, I can't say both of those words back to back, otherwise I combine them. One of the great realizations that most people have when they approach this subject is, wow, what we see are very old yet very advanced forms of technology. And that could range from anything from the Antikythera device that was found underneath the Mediterranean, somewhere maybe in the Aegean Sea off the peninsula of Greece, to something as large as the Great Pyramids, which might be like the largest piece of technology on the planet, because we're finding now that the pyramids had a mechanical, a
Mhm.
religious or sacred, an energetic, and maybe even a biochemical function all at once, not like one or the other. This isn't take your pick. This was
Yeah.
like a multifunctional device. And maybe even as or I'm sorry, is it Joseph? Yeah, Joseph Farrell. I almost said Campbell. But as Dr. Joseph Farrell says, it might have even been a giant weapon at some point that harnessed the entire power of the earth. So when we look around the earth, it's at that point only people who are lying to themselves, who are still believing in this myth of linear upward progression, right? Anyone who's being honest with themselves, who reviews ancient history, can see that we are these sort of remnants of the refugees, if you will, of an advanced age. So everything we have now
Yes.
is a sort of weak and uninformed recreation of what once was. Now, that's not to say, oh, well, everything's, hackneyed and get rid of it all. Like, I'm not coming from this as like a communist socialist who wants to burn it all down because it's worthless. I think we just need to understand history clearly to move forward. So that's kind of like the top down hypothesis of everything I think about Atlantis. I kind of want to take things maybe step by step with you and
So
just show why I came to this conclusion, and then also maybe reiterate some of the other evidences for Atlantis being a real empire. And again, that's what the Egyptians told the Greeks it was called, right? So there are other names similar to Atlantis that exist around the world for this civilization. In South America, they have the term Atlan, which Atlan has made its way into the Aztec culture and other cultures that possibly all like roots of a great tree, they all trace themselves back to one common origin, that is this Atlan civilization. And maybe even that word is, has changed. Like maybe in other parts of the world, based on language and etymology, it's a different form. But I don't have that chart in front of me, but there are a few similar place names that exist in different languages, in different cultures for a place name that is sort of like an original place, whether they say the gods came from that place or they say they came from that place. But typically, there is this within most cultures, if not every culture, this legend of a once great past, right? This is the time of the gods, this is the time of the demigods. And as history's progressed, we've kind of filtered a lot of that out. And then when the age of discovery happens and these new worlds, quote unquote, are discovered, quote unquote, discovered, um, there's maybe a more pure version of the Atlantean culture that then is met by the European forces who, on a very esoteric level, understand all this stuff and are actually engaging in a sort of cover up or a war against this. So the history of the new world is like a cover up. That's kind of what I've come to the conclusion of. Meaning Columbus didn't just discover this place haphazardly. They knew where they were going and had a sort of plan of attack for how they were going to take back this land in a sort of subtle way, because this was historically the origin of all civilization. It's not the Middle East, it's America. It's North America and South America. And that's
So,
why.
so I have a question there, Mark. Are you also, when you're talking about this, are you also saying that this is like the origin of all civilizations? Are you talking like Eden as well?
That that I don't know for sure, and, how many worlds have there been? How many ages have there been before Atlantis? I mean, there could be dozens, if not innumerable amounts, right? I don't necessarily think that we're at, like, the beginning of anything. I think if anything, we're as, like, I believe the Mayans tell us, and with their calendar, we're coming to the end of even this world that we're in right now. If it's the 4th world or the 5th world, I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
it is one of those. Yeah, because they're like was supposed to be destroyed by water, by fire, by the jaguar. Yeah,
Right.
you're correct.
Well, and what's a Jaguar if not like this military industrial complex that we have that's like a stealth killer now with all these drones and the just tech warfare and all that. But yeah, and I've had maybe you've listened to my interview with Bibu Dev Misra, who goes and traces how the yuga cycles within the Hindu culture reflect other global calendar systems or
I
ancient calendar
I actually
systems, right?
just started listening to that episode. I just started into it, but I have not finished it.
That's fine. Yeah, well, good timing to brush up on that for this interview because yeah, Bibu he's a very forward-thinking guy, and I think if anyone's interested in my sort of phrasing, rambling version of all this, you can find maybe a more accurate version of some of this through Bibu. So feel free to link to that episode, and then people can follow up there. But when I was just starting this podcast, a lot of the conspiracies of, anything, I thought I knew them all, I've heard all of them, right? That's what I thought. But around 2018 or so, I started hearing about like Tartaria stuff, and I actually didn't even have a podcast yet back then, but I remember learning about it, and I was a little confused at first. A coworker, actually, a buddy of mine, he's still a buddy, even though we don't work together anymore, um, told me about the whole mud flood theory and whatnot. And I was interested, but I also knew enough about history to say, like, okay, well, there's at least 400 years of history just here on the East Coast of the United States that's recorded to a certain extent. Just because that's how old most of the cities are. They go back to the 1600s, the bigger cities, like, the ones people would know, like New York City, Philadelphia, Boston. Um, Close to me is New Haven, which is an old city as well. So I started thinking about this and I'm like, all right, well, if this mud flood stuff or this old world stuff has any truth to it, then there's surely going to be some evidence of that in the form of a cover up, or maybe even in the form of records that haven't been covered up yet. So I just started looking, and around the same time, synchronistically, we started looking into the stone structures all around New England. And after a while, the two ideas sort of were like just spinning around, and I was kind of turning my wheels like, well, what exactly is going on here? Because everything you read about the stone structures is like, oh well, the Native Americans built them, but because they were, killed and put on reservations and made sick with all sorts of diseases, we don't know anything about what they used them for, right? And there's some truth there, and there is truth to the Native Americans having use for stone, and even to the extent of, when it comes to building their own stone structures, in some cases they did, whether those were walls or shelters or even using stone for other ingenious purposes. They were doing that kind of stuff. They even had like a rudimentary version of cement in certain tribes. And of course, the further south you go, they're working with adobe. They're building full blown structures into the sides of buildings and or into the sides of cliff faces and things. But when it comes to like this landscape that I've grown up in, it's very rocky, very rocky topsoil, very uneven, and a lot of hills and mountains. So we don't really have much in the way of like mounds and things like that. But we do have these really interesting stone chambers, stone walls, stone dolmens, standing stones, even stone circles. And this is all very similar to what's found in Europe. And there's really no suppression of that topic. Anybody can go and look up Stonehenge or any of the cairns, whether it's in France at Karnak or innumerable places in Germany and Norway and all over Scandinavia. They have them. Even Iceland, Ireland, the UK, right? Obviously, Avebury. So all of these sites are well known and established in Europe and have a sort of somewhat of a lineage of who built them, or an idea. Maybe it's not a accurate idea, it's more of a vague guess, but there's more information. Whereas with the New England structures, and some of them are in New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, even Canada, of course, there's really not much in the way of information, especially coming from authorized official sources. There's plenty of kind of like amateur type authors, and some that are way overqualified to be publishing books with the publishers that will accept them. I mean, it really feels like a censored topic in the same way
You're
you would
completely right.
see. Yeah, you might see, like, the UFO topic at a certain point in history was censored from being published, or maybe the, Bigfoot topic. Nowadays, that's like wildfire. Anybody can publish a book on those subjects, whereas these subjects sometimes do involve alien theories, but for the most part, the word on the street when you talk to even the Native Americans is that these stone chambers and stone structures were built by giants. And of course, there's the legend of giants in America still to this day with the Sasquatch and all of the mounds and the skeletons found in the mounds. So my thought is, well, if we have all these ancient stone structures and we have all of these sort of like mysteries that are not really being nurtured, they're just kind of being neglected. Maybe there's a there in the form of Atlantis, and when it comes to different secret societies and whatnot, what secret society has flourished more than any other in America but the Freemasons, right? And this whole, issue is one that kind of relies on stone, right? So I don't know. It does seem like there's something there, but as
Mhm.
far as like actual evidence for this, I think it's at this point, at this stage in my part in this research, it's just a guess, but I would like to if I can share my screen, I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
show
Please go ahead.
some of things I've found. So, for the listening audience, I will be as clear as I can to kind of describe this stuff, but it should be able to.
There we go.
All right, you see it?
I had to mess around with my settings a little bit, but I got it. Here we go.
Cool. So on the right hand side, that's me. I'm kind of in the shadow. It's hard to see, but on the right hand side, there I am. Oh, let me zoom back in. Can I go in any further? No, I guess not. So yeah, that is a very large stone, and maybe it's not obvious, but I'm pretty tall. I'm about 6'8". So the stone itself is probably about 8 feet high altogether. And if you notice there on the right hand side, there's a sign. It says it's called the Balanced Rock. This is in North Salem, New York, and underneath it are four smaller stones which are like pedestals holding this entire thing up. And there's a number of theories on like how you would build something like this. None of them are like some of them are kind of out there, but I mean, it's not absolutely impossible for people to build something like this using the right techniques. But if you look where my hand is, do you see my hand right there?
Yeah.
There's a line going up and then a sort of shaded area right here, and it makes kind of like a shape here, right? So there's a thought that maybe some of these stone structures are carved and have petroglyphs in them. Someone said that this kind of looks like a panther sitting on its side. I mean, I don't like to get into the whole pareidolia thing of like what does that look like or not, but when it comes to other stone structures, it gets a little bit more unavoidable. Like the the forms of the stones it's hard to argue that there's like a human eye that's carving that or shaping it. So this one's a little bit more vague, but then obviously on the side here we have all these stone chambers. All of these are my own photos. I've taken all these photos myself. I'm pretty sure. I mean, one of these might be from Google, but I'm pretty sure I've been to at least 6 stone chambers. So these might all be my photos, maybe not, but this one at least is my photo. I know that. But anyways, yeah. So the stone chambers are interesting because they're quite large inside, and the stones, even like the stone lintels that you can see, the sort of top of the doorway there, they can weigh up to like 500 pounds. I mean, these are large, large stones. So it's quite advanced techniques used to build these things, and we don't really know, what they're for, who built them. The Native Americans say, they didn't build them. They think the giants who lived here before them built them. And I'm not saying that, oh, these were like advanced stone chambers that Atlantis used. No, I'm saying these are essentially the works of refugees from that Atlantean time who still survived in the wilds of North America after the collapse of their civilization and most likely informed the religious practices of the Celts and other Northern European groups, as well as the Native Americans who have similar spiritual ideologies and in many ways similar cultural aspects. So there is something to be said about these stone chambers and what their uses are. But as far as the obvious indicators, seems like they have a spiritual purpose because more often than not, these chambers tend to be aligned with the well, with
With
various,
like
they're not
do
all the same, but various
like cardinal
astrological
points.
features. No, they would be like astronomical features. So it would be like the sun on the equinoxial point coming through a, specific notch in the wall of the stone chamber so that you would know, okay, today's the winter solstice or today's the fall equinox, today's the spring equinox, today's the winter, or did I say winter already? Summer solstice. So, there's season indicators like that, which are you would use astronomy or rudimentary understanding of astronomy to be able to figure that out. Even beyond that, to be more advanced, like seeing specific constellations and tracking them and knowing, okay, but then again, the chamber doors too can be aligned to the sunset and or I'm sorry, sunrise most of the time. Some occasionally they'll be aligned to the sunset, but yeah, most of the time what I've seen is they look like they're aligned to the east. Um, but yeah, this is kind of like where it all started for me, is just researching this and coming up with some dead ends and finding that, yes, there are people researching this topic and a lot of really smart people. But as far as like a huge like hypothesis explaining this, there isn't much in the way of that. So here's my Substack article. I kind of include um, a lot of thoughts and theories from Michael Laflemme. I quote him a couple times in this Substack because his book, Visions of Atlantis, is really groundbreaking. I recommend you reach out to him and have him on your show yourself, just so I don't have to like repeat all of his stuff. But he basically
Is this
shows
the
how
one?
Edgar.
Was this the one where this individual had like past life or memories of being in a different memories of being in Atlantis?
Basically, so Edgar Casey and another author who I forget his name at this point. I forgot, it'll come to me, but there was another author who wrote a book and never published it in his own lifetime. He was embarrassed by it because he channeled it and wasn't really sure what to make of the information that he was receiving. So he just left the book in his home and unfortunately died at a young age. And his mother, in an attempt to kind of make, uh, I don't know, redeem him in some way, considering he lost his life young, and maybe she felt like he, had some sort of unearned potential there with that book. So she published it. And, that kinda lends credit to the whole story to me, because the guy clearly wasn't a hoaxer. He wasn't making any money off of the book, never saw it published himself, didn't want anyone to read it, and he predicted, quote, unquote, "predicted," all these really incredible things that you wouldn't guess, someone in the late 1800s could have imagined, something like a cell phone or a flying car or teleportation, psychic communication through technology. And all of this is described in this book, A Dweller on Two Planets, I think is the title of the book. And and then the author, it's like Philos the Tibetan. And this isn't the author himself, this is the entity that the author channeled in the 1800s. So it's kind of a wild book, and Michael Laflemme, argues that it's kind of far-fetched to think this guy could have just made up all this stuff and then just pinned it on, "Oh, well, an entity channeled it through me." Seems more likely that he, had some sort of contact with an entity that compelled him to automatically write this book. And the book isn't really like a book the way we would know a novel or like a textbook. It's more like a recalling of this guy's life. So it's very interesting stuff, but it also is a little bit like self-absorbed in that sense, because it's not. I don't know quite what Philos Tibetan, or Thebetan, I think is how it's spelled with a th. I don't think you know. I don't know exactly what his aim was with the book. It seems more like a sort of like a wrong place, right time kind of situation where this boy grew up he actually lived near Mount Shasta, which to this day is a very spiritual place. But yeah, he must have just been in the wrong place at the right time for this entity to possess him and selfishly, record, which, if it was received by a different audience, maybe it would have changed the world more than it has. I don't know that many people even know about this book at all, but Michael Laflemme does a good job of kind of showing how this text that was created way back then predicted all these things about the future that just I mean, they can't it's just preposterous to think that it just all came out of somebody's imagination. What's more likely is that this is a real disembodied entity recalling his past life through a living person. I mean, maybe that sounds really far fetched to some people, but when you then pair that with the living channeler, Edgar Casey, who has a full record of all of his accurate predictions. And we're talking about things that came true years after he was dead and gone. We're talking about accurate medical diagnoses that he would give to people on a weekly, regular basis for very little compensation. He did this as a healer, as a spiritual person. He would, go to sleep, and within this sleep state, he would. I think somebody would write what he would mumble, or I'm not exactly
I can't remember. Yeah, I do know that he was like the sleeping psychic or
he's a
something like
sleeping
that. Yeah,
prophet. I don't know
yeah,
the exact specifics as to how the information was recorded. Maybe he was asleep, and then when he woke up, he, wrote it down, or yeah, I don't think he was automatic writing while he was sleeping. He might have been, but when you look into Edgar Casey, it's very hard to write that all off as, oh, this guy was just pulling everyone's leg and he was just running a sophisticated scam. I mean, you're really proving so much more by saying you're attempting to prove so much more with that than you are just believing what Edgar Casey honestly, retells about his life. And yeah, I don't know, he's helped a lot of people and didn't gain that much for it. I don't think Edgar Casey, like, died in, like, a huge mansion or anything. I could be wrong.
yeah.
He
No,
does have a
I agree with you. Yeah, he wasn't out there for the money, and I do
right,
believe it was when he woke up, he was able to write it down himself. At that point,
right. Well, and when it comes to Atlantis, Edgar Casey had some things to say about Atlantis, and people can go and find, whole books published by the foundation that was created after Edgar Casey passed away to kind of keep up with all of his work and promote it, publish it, etc. So, yeah, you can read all about his Atlantis predictions, and some of them actually came true, just as he said. One of them I think is well known is that he predicted to the day when they would discover the Bimini roads, which are somewhere in the Caribbean Ocean.
yeah, near
And there's
Bermuda.
also
I believe they're near Bermuda. Really strangely enough, kind of near the Bermuda Triangle, but I believe it's near Bermuda or the Bahamas. Yeah,
right, and then on the off the coast of Japan, I don't know if Casey predicted this, but there are some sites off the coast of Japan as well. And then I just learned from my friend Mike Wan last week that Casey also predicted the discovery of a blue stone that would be used in the future to have a beneficial healing effect on someone spiritual bodies, and this is known as the Atlantis stone. It's also called Larimar, and he predicted that they would discover it. I don't know if he predicted the exact location, but it was eventually discovered, and there's more to it. I don't know all the exact specifics on that one, but it just kind of coincidentally came up last week, so I figured I'd mention it here now. But yeah, that's kind of where I'll stop with Michael Laflemme's work. And again, I recommend his book Visions of Atlantis. It's available on Amazon, all platforms. I have the ebook, and Mike's a great guy, really interesting dude, has a lot to say. And actually, I think he's in Mexico. Not to dox him, but he's not too far from you, buddy.
that is something definitely. Yeah, I wrote down his name. I'm like, I'm definitely need to talk to him because I've heard about this book more than once. This is not the first time I've heard about this, and I found it very fascinating. I think I heard him on. It might have been on Tony's show, or someone's, or
He was on Sam's tinfoil hat, and he was on my show as well. But yeah, Yeah, I don't might have been on Tony's too. Tony's great, but yeah. So I'll just leave it there with Mike. I mean, definitely go forward and interview
Yep.
him yourself. But with Plato and our Western civilization's idea of Atlantis, it's kind of been filtered down over time by academia, and now they kind of just say, "Oh, well, it's just an allegory or something like that." But when
Yeah.
you really look at the details given by Plato, I mean, to say it's an allegory is kind of like just shows that they don't know Plato that well because when he's writing an allegory, it's kind of obvious compared to when he's not, right? So I mean, that just to me proves that they're being sort of they're not being genuine, they're being disingenuous, I'll say. But anyways, yeah, Plato is definitely like where a lot of the buck stops with Atlantis for people when they hear that, when they get the academics version of Plato. But there's so much more to Plato than what we're told in our average, civics class. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of instead of giving people snooze lecture on Plato because I'm not all that interested in a lot of this stuff either. It's stuff I learned in school, and I don't know. I'm interested in it to a certain extent, but there's a lot of it's a lot of jargon you have to learn with different time periods and the context and the way they speak is different than we speak today. So but anyways, Plato's source, we're gonna kind of track it here. We got a couple of names. We've got Sanchez, who shared it with Solon, who shared it with Dropides, who shared it with Critias's grandfather, who then shared it with Critias, who then shared it with Socrates, and then finally Plato got the word of Atlantis. So yeah, as I was saying before, Plato's not exactly the precise, source for this information, but we have to make the best of what we got. And I think we all played, for the most part, that telephone game in school, right? Where you pass a message down from person to person, and eventually the message is altered entirely, right? So who knows what that conversation between Sanchez and Solon was like? Maybe it's a completely different version of Atlantis than what Plato tells us. So that's something to keep in mind. But here's some other mentions of Atlantis that go back before Plato and after Plato and separate from Plato altogether, because some of these cultures, again, were before Plato, so he didn't even exist yet. And then others were just they didn't give a flying F about Greek culture. They don't know anything about Greek culture, so there's no way that they, at that point in time had any knowledge of Plato, even though he had already existed with some of these cases I'm going to point out here. But so we have the Turin's King list, which lists 10 Aleutian or Auretian. But yeah, it says basically in the Turin's King list, which existed in the 13th century BC of Egypt, this was when it was recorded. It lists 10 Aleutian or Aretian god kings who ruled in a foreign land during the reign of the gods before approximately 9850 BC. Plato also mentions Atlantis being ruled by 10 kings in his dialogues and says Atlantis was destroyed near 9600 BC, which again, we're counting backwards with the BC era. So
Yes.
9850 would be an earlier time period than 9600 BC. So that would be later in the stages of history, would be 9600 BC. So yeah, the times kind of add up. The story matches a little bit with Plato's story. Then we have the Karna Parva in the Mahabharata, which was in existence, still is to this day, but was created around 1000 to 800 BC in India, which describes a 10-year war at the end of which an island called Atala and all of its inhabitants sank into the Western Ocean. So again, we have a similar place name, as I was saying before, Atlantis, Atala, Atlan. All these words have similar syllables in them, similar sounds. Could it be that they're all talking about the same place that had a watery cataclysm, sinking into the ocean? Today, you look at any country, and if they have a coastline, it's fair to say that a good deal of the population lives along that coastline because there's more resources, there's more opportunities for employment in places where there's a coastline. So naturally, people live in great numbers in those places, and that's where Atlantis probably suffered the most of its damage to its civilization, but it was not wiped out entirely. Um, Hesiod in his Theogony in 735 BC, describes a story in which the Titans, after losing a 10-year war, were imprisoned in a watery tomb beneath the Atlantic Ocean. And then, of course, Solon, who I believe was, yeah, right there in my chart earlier, his lost poem, Atlantica, which is probably where Plato plagiarized his story from or just passed it along. This was in 590 BC in Athens, and yeah, it would have described Atlantis in greater detail than what Plato gave us. Um, and then in India, we have the Ramayana in the 5th century BC, which describes the destruction of Lanka in an attack by Rama and Hanuman, which would be two of the Vedic gods. And this was some 10,000 years before 5th century, the 5th century BC. So kind of a rough estimate there. But again, it kind of lines up with what we're hearing in all these other stories. So yeah, there's some more examples. Hellenicus has another story of Atlantis. Um, and then as we move further along the timeline here, we also have the Romans recording information about Atlantis. And this is prior to Plato's story too, which is interesting. The Romans were in existence during Plato's time and were moving around doing things, conquering lands, and probably interacting with these Atlantean refugees if they weren't a faction of that Atlantis government themselves. There's some people who I've spoken to on my podcast who believe that the Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church, which is still kind of, basically the Roman Empire, that's all they trace their lineage back to a faction that broke off from Atlantis and has survived in this sort of concealed covert way since. Um, so yeah, a lot of evidence there.
Interesting. And possibly like the Vatican then plays a part in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and where are all these books stored? Probably in their library, keeping it all secret from anyone who can't read Latin or access those libraries. So yeah, I think there's a definite theme going on here. Aristotle mentions that outside the pillars of Heracles, the sea is shallow owing to the mud, but calm for it lies in a hollow. And one thing to state there is that the pillars of Heracles or Hercules, those we would think of as like the Strait of Gibraltar, right? That's what we're told that was considered the pillar of Hercules or the pillars of Hercules. Well, that's actually not the most accurate understanding of that. Yes, it's true to a certain extent, but this was more of a phrase used to describe the scope of the culture's reach. So to say the pillars of Hercules was basically saying like the bounds of the known world, the final frontier, the way we use like that term space is the final frontier or the ocean is this lost frontier. That's kind of how they thought of anything outside of the Pillars of Hercules like outside of the Greeks' known world. It didn't mean it was like it didn't exist. It just meant that they didn't know about it. They hadn't adventured that far. Again, they're a young culture, as the Egyptian Solon sort of patronized uh, uh, Plato, but it wasn't Plato. It was whoever Solon passed it on to. But yeah, so plenty of examples. And then another point that we should note with this quote from Aristotle is that he mentions a shallow sea with mud. Well, if you look in the center of the northern, but sort of just dead center in the Atlantic Ocean, there's something called the Sargasso Sea, which is essentially like it's not necessarily muddy, but there are sand uh, banks there, and there's a lot of plant life that grows close to the surface. And people have gotten lost because their boats kind of get screwed up in all of this thick, choppy water that's in this kind of low point in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So maybe this is the sunken island that we're told is been destroyed. And that's one of the theories, is that Atlantis, yes, like I said, was not just what got sunk under the ocean. There were other parts in North America, but the main part of their civilization was a naval civilization, and they had a center island. They had all this land in the Americas, but they were mainly situated as a kind of coastal and naval culture. So when this giant flood came, eh, people who had boats survived to a certain extent if they were able to get out of the storm waters. But anyways, yeah, that's just something to note. The Sargasso Sea, even to this day, takes people off their course, and the Bermuda Triangle has a similar reputation. And I don't know if the Sargasso Sea and the Bermuda Triangle intersect. The Sargasso Sea might actually be in that like top northern corner of the Bermuda Triangle. I could just be, mixing things in my head here, but I'm almost certain they're almost close enough to be like, okay, there's something going on there. But anyways, yeah, we got more examples of
One
people.
second,
Go
Mark.
ahead, Rob.
Mark, 1 second. You said Sargasso Sea. So there is, when you're talking Sargassa, is a type of seaweed of sorts that has been washing
That's
ashore.
the plant. Yep.
It's been washing ashore in Mexico, like it's blowing up. It is crazy. It's been doing that now for about 10 years now, and because the currents changed, and we are getting infested with this. Like it's a nuisance. It is such a nuisance that it's coming in. Like I'll go to the beach here, and you got to walk through, like a foot and a half of sargasso that's sitting on the beach, and just to get into the water.
Okay, so this is what it is. So yeah, the Sargasso Sea has tons of that seaweed, and seaweed is a edible nutritional source of food. So who knows? Maybe the Atlanteans had a huge like Sargassa cultivation sort of thing going on, and then when their civilization collapsed, like it just started to eat itself, like the way like a farm gets overgrown when nobody tends to it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I got you. Yeah, it's crazy how much is here, and I'm surprised that they haven't found more uses for it here. Like, I think it would be perfect for throwing on crops and putting it on the land, to fertilize the land, because there is so much of it. Like every day they take out tons and tons. It's not like just a little bit. We're we're talking like a foot and a half, 2 feet deep, maybe even more than that. Like that's on the shore, not what's in the water still. So it's a bit of an issue when it comes to actually the tourist side of the Yucatan Peninsula and the area.
Maybe I just don't know enough about seaweed, but does seaweed grow like maybe I should just this is a thing for another podcast, but now I'm really curious, like, how does seaweed grow, and then how does it distribute? Because I live by the beach, and that's the thing out here. It's usually like, the first 3 feet of where the tide line just was will have, like, a huge pile of seaweed stretching as long as the beach is, and you just kinda kick past it and get into the water. It's never enough to where you're like, "Oh gosh," but definitely, I mean, there are some spots where it's like that, but yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if there's anything to be said there with the seaweed itself and the quality of it, and if it, I mean, who knows? Maybe not the most interesting questions to ask without answers, but, I'll find some answers and write a Substack article about seaweed.
I'd be
It's not a bad.
interested to read that for sure.
Cool. Well, there's another, timeline, mention reference to Atlantis that's even more sensational and interesting than any of the ones I read previously. This is from the Vishnu Purana from the 4th century AD of India, and it mentions Atala, the white island across a salty sea in the west, inhabited by sun worshipping Magas, a Sanskrit word quite similar to the Latin magus or magician. Atala is shown situated at the same latitude as the present day Canary Islands, with no longitude provided. And in the Canary Islands today, there's a town named La Atalaya. So it's pretty much almost Atala right there in the name with an extra ya at the end. But yeah, Laatalaya
And
at
you said Naga as well, right? Naga?
Maga, like magus or magician, ma.
But before that, I thought you had said, the Naga or something along that line.
Yeah, yeah, the sun worshipping Magas.
Oh,
Magas. I can't.
Magas. Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, 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 like the word mage, but with a at the end, or, I mean, like, Make America Great Again,
Make
I
it
mean,
yeah,
it's
there's a
pretty much
reason
what
why
it
they
is.
picked that acronym. Yeah, there's something.
Right, right. Well, yeah, it's literally, the term magus, and I forget who broke this down on Tinfoil Hat. I think it might have either been Chris Knowles or Brandon Kroll. They both were on recently. They're talking about how the red caps were worn by these different cults in the past and secret societies.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
they're
the
putting.
red hats, I agree with you, you're funny one is, you talk to Shriners as well, they got their little red beanies on as well, that's something else.
Do you see any MAGA hats in Mexico? Is that like a crazy?
You don't
That would
see
be
any of
every.
that, no. It's like, no one really
They're all.
cares here. No one really cares. It's they all think it's a joke.
I don't think Mexico would like Trump anyways, but yeah, no, that's interesting. Uh, but yeah, MAGA, Magus, magician. So Atlantis had this reputation, and I don't think it's any coincidence that all these secret societies have kind of, I don't know, uh, they sort of like say it without saying it, like
Yes, yeah.
it's like they're great
Everybody beats around
secret.
the bush on with it.
Yeah, and I'm not a part of the Masons or any group like that, but, it's just my guess that maybe this is one of their big secrets is, like, they've kept or preserved knowledge from this ancient time. They survived the cataclysm with this knowledge and passed it along through these very specialized, exclusive groups, and a lot of the people that, quote, unquote, "discovered" the new world had affiliations with these secret societies, whether directly or through conscription, like they were conscribed or pay contracted to do these types of journeys or missions, explorations by people within a secret society or had some sort of secret agenda along with it. And in front of me, I have a guy named Francisco Lopez de Gomara. And he was one of these Spanish explorers, conquistadors, as they're known now. Um, and he explored South America before really anyone else from Europe. I mean, at that time, it was a complete wilderness, right? Aside from the Mayan, Aztec, and um, Well, Mayans and Aztecs were in the were in Central America, so actually I misspoke there. So it would have just been the Incas and then whatever indigenous tribes, right, in South America, maybe remnants of ancient Maya, but I believe they had all gone north by then. Uh, but anyways, yeah, Francisco Lopez de Gomara, he wrote in his dialogues, or he basically, sorry, he quotes Plato. Okay. He says, Plato writes in his dialogues of Timaeus and Critias that in the old time there was in the sea Atlantic over against Africa an island called the Atlantide, greater than Africa and Asia, affirming that those lands are from thence continent and great. This is all wrote in the this is 14th century writing here, so please, I mean, I'm doing my best here, folks. Um, thence continent and great, and that the kings of that island governed a great part of Africa and Europe, but that in a certain great earthquake and tempest of rain, this island sank and the people were drowned. Also, that there remained so much mud of the drowning or sinking of that island that the sea Atlantic could not be sailed. Some take this for a fable, and many for a true history, as does Marcel Marcellus Phineas in citing Proclus, alleging certain histories of the Ethiopians written by one Marcellus, who confirms the same to be true. But there is now no cause why we should any longer doubt or dispute of the island Atlanti, for as much as the discovering and conquest of the West Indies do plainly declare what Plato hath written of the said lands. In Mexico also at this day they call that water Atl, by the half name of Atlantis, as a by a word remaining of the same name of the island that is no longer in existence. So here you have conquistador, one of the first people to, officially explore South America. And he himself is like, we found it. This is clearly what Plato was talking about. And then he cites another explorer who's kind of coming to the same conclusion around the same time, Marcilius Ficinius. I did not pronounce his name right then or before, but yeah, he's also
You are
someone who
forgiven. You are forgiven.
So, yeah, this is, again, like, another really great example, and then we have, Michel de Montaigne, and I believe he was a French explorer. He looks French compared to the last guy, and he has a similar another quote that basically says, like, you know, um, let's see. It does not seem very likely that this new world we have just discovered was this island of Atlantis, for it almost touched Spain, and the effect of that inundation would have been incredible if it had pushed the island back to where the New World is, a distance of more than 1,200 leagues. Besides, modern navigators have already made it almost certain that the New World is not an island but a mainland connected on one side with the East Indies and on the other with the lands under the two poles. And he basically that that quote maybe goes against what I was saying. I think I just read the wrong part of the quote, but he's basically saying that the lands between Spain and the New World were covered in mud, and only recently were they able to sail them. So I think
Which is interesting because when there were that one quote earlier about the pillars of Hercules, and just outside, there was the sea with the mud. They were talking about the mud in there, and then and in the beginning when we were talking about mud floods, you know it very much could all be tied together somehow. Like these, maybe not necessarily mud floods as new as they think it is, but maybe these mud floods were much older. This happened much
right.
many years ago.
Right. Well, and I think again, like going back to the whole like reason I got interested in this stuff with like Tartaria and whatnot, here you have again these explorers saying, well, there was all this mud, there's all this water that flooded everything and destroyed everything. So maybe this is what has been covered up, what they're covering up under the mud, and then when they go and excavate these places and all of a sudden they have a wonderful, amazing building with all this wonderful stuff in it. At first I was like, that's kind of far-fetched to think that they could just, pull all that stuff out of the ground. But if you think about it, it's not that far-fetched considering that's what the Greeks and the Romans were building, these similar types of architectures to what we have here in America. Obviously, the official story is, oh, well, we're trying to emulate the classical style.
Yes,
We're trying,
yes, we're
right,
copying. Yeah.
right. And I don't necessarily like. I'm not going so far into Tartaria where I'm like, yeah, every single building is a mud flooded building. But I do think that you can't discount the star forts, which it doesn't. I mean, a military has no qualms against taking a structure and refortifying it for their own purpose. So that happens all the time in wars. So obviously, there's a explanation for the star forts somewhere. But yeah, I don't, again, I don't think it's completely far-fetched when you find out that, okay, well, yeah, these guys who were back in the 14th century or 15th century were talking about mud floods making it impossible to travel to certain parts of the world. And you're even mentioning like Sargasso is so thick that like swimming at the beach isn't that fun. Like, I know seaweed and mud aren't the same thing, but if we knew more about seaweed, maybe we'd be like, oh well, the seaweed grows in the mud, So who knows?
Exactly.
Maybe it
We
is
don't we
connected.
don't know yet.
That is something I will be looking into soon. So folks, follow up with me there on the
Stay
seaweed
tuned
front.
for yeah, my family
More
thinks I'm crazy
seaweed talk.
seaweed special episode.
Yes. But there's more still. In the 1600s, a man by the name of Athanasius Kircher. He was a Jesuit and published around 40 major works. He considered him a polymath. He wrote in all these different subjects, and he was one of the world's first Egyptologists. And what he claims to have discovered is an intact map of Atlantis dating back to the era of Imperial Rome, and they even have America on this map. I have talked to people on the show who say that the Romans traveled to America, and there's evidence of that in the form of different Roman vessels that have been uncovered in shallow waters off the coasts of different bodies of water around North America, the Gulf Caribbean, Hudson Bay. And then you also have the Great Lakes, and people maybe finding things like Roman coins all across America. And what do they say? Oh, well, those are just hoaxes. People who love coins and history, they hoax these kind of things to feel good about themselves. When you look at something that's old, at a certain point you have to trust your gut. And I don't know what the capacity to test and date these things truly is. I don't know if it's possible to date something like a metal coin. Maybe it is, depending on what type of metal it is. But yeah, they have found this stuff. You can write it off and say, oh, well, it's just a hoax. But here we have a German Jesuit really before America was a thing, right? In the 1600s, there were people traveling here, obviously, but the country didn't form officially until the 1700s. So, yeah, it's just kind of interesting that they have this map going back then. And
Very, very.
Mhm.
I would love to see that map. I should try finding that and putting it up. Then, if there's a copy of that or any type
if you
of
type in if you type in Athanasius, which is spelled Athanasius, Kircher, Kircher, and then you type in Atlantis map, it should be the first image that comes up in a search. And anyone in the audience, I encourage you to do that too, because yeah, it's a cool map. I don't know if the one I'm looking at is a recreation or the original. I'm gonna guess it's a recreation just because it's pretty high quality image, but who knows? Could be an exact replica, digital recreation, but Um, I definitely think there's something to it. And there's also, again, islands that exist in the Atlantic Ocean that have place names that connect to this etymologically and other things too, like animals. One of the, I think they're like one of the strongest or most fearsome guard dogs in the world come from the Canary Islands, and the Spanish discovered these dogs and then started breeding them to be like basically like German, the way we use German shepherds and police forces now, but attack dogs basically. And where would you have like a high quality breed like that in just some random island? Or maybe is it because this island's connected to something greater in the past? Is it that this very specialized type of dog just happened to develop on this random island? Or is it that these dogs survived here from a ancient time and were maybe more common because they were formidable, protective guard dogs? We're talking about 10,000 years ago. So large fauna on the planet, it was a whole different scenario. There was probably way more predators out there. So maybe it was, maybe and I'm just imagining things here, folks, but maybe guard dogs were essential in the Atlantean culture, and that's why they're on this island. And then the Spanish find them and then take them and make them like a world high quality, high class pedigree of dog. Like it's kind of, I don't know. I don't, again, that's another one to look into is like the genetics of this dog breed and like if there's any indications that it somehow connects to Atlantis somehow.
Exactly. Where does it come from as well? That's really, really interesting.
So, but yeah, and with this topic, you could really go down so many different angles. The book I mentioned before, A Dweller on Two Planets by Philos the Theban. It was written by Frederick Spencer Oliver in the 1880s. And again, didn't publish it himself. His mother published it for him 6 years after he died. And I encourage anyone to read it because there's tons of strange stuff in there about everything from smartphones to holographic image projectors, video surveillance, electric rifles, a book machine, a huge organ, criminal reform using brain re-entertainment technology, weather manipulation technology, advanced aircraft that can also go underwater. Like, to say that this man in the 1880s just imagined all these things and wrote it in a fictional way, A, defies his own account of what happened when he wrote the book, so you're calling him a liar by suggesting that all this is just fiction, and then B, you'd have to presuppose that a person in the 1880s, without any access to other science fiction at the time, because he was living in the middle of nowhere pretty much. So he wasn't like reading the day's fiction writers and coming up with like ideas from there. Completely unexposed, completely uneducated as far as like what we would now consider a writing career, right? What an author or a writer, someone who writes a novel or science fiction novel, even, there's a certain amount of training that goes into this. He had none of that, and he's describing things like monorail, high speed transportation, wireless energy, speech to text transmission, atmospheric water generation. Like, it's like how, and to suggest, okay, well, this was an ancient being channeling this information through him. Okay, maybe there's some more credit to it. Some other things that he revealed through this book was that the Amazon River basin was once a massive center for agricultural innovation, planting crops that were brought from all around the world. This is something that's been proven by science in the modern day. How could he have known that and wrote it in his fiction book if it's truly a fiction book? So this has been proven. We know that the Amazon has a high quality soil content that defies any other form of agriculture. It's a super nutrient, and that's why the jungles have grown to such an extent because it was once potentially this huge agricultural center, and when that all fell apart, well, the remnants of it are like the best thing for a jungle to grow because what do plants need? They need dead things to grow, right? They need decaying things to grow. So, and there's I mean, there's so many other things here that are mentioned in the book. Another thing that's really cool is Philos describes the Nazca lines 30 years before they were discovered. So nobody even knew what the Nazca lines were when this guy was writing this book, yet they're described in this book in one of the parts where Philos is talking about his life in this ancient time, and he's flying in one of these Valix airships, and he flies over these Nazca lines. So it's like, how are you figuring that out just from your home in Mount Shasta? You know, you're just a teenager, and a force possesses you to write a book. You know, it's a wild thing to think about. But when you add up all the things that he predicted, it's like, oh wow,
Yeah, I've heard a lot about this book, and it sounds really fascinating. I think he was like 16 years old when he wrote that.
started. Yeah,
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 and it's like, where do you come up with that at that time? Yeah, you don't. It is someone else is feeding you that information. You know, a higher source is feeding you that information.
right. Right, and I mean, there's so many other, like, little notes here too that I can bring up, like, today, Inca the Inca people, they call the sun Incal, right? Well, Philo states that in his time period, they called the sun Incal. Again, the author, Spencer Oliver, not an expert in Inca culture. Yes, the Incas had already existed by the time this book was written, so he could have conceivably found that information somehow, but anthropology texts was not, they weren't really being published at that time, and he wasn't reading them if they were. So, yeah, it's just another one of these things that's like, well, how did he guess that? And then another strange thing, considering the Mormons and their presence in the world and everything weird about them, he describes a dry seabed now known as Lake Bonneville that stretched across present day Salt Lake City, as well as parts of Nevada and Utah. He said there was huge inland sea there. And again, scientists have now discovered that, yes, in fact, in a certain time in history, Nevada, Utah were covered by a giant sea, a giant, like, inland freshwater body of water.
Wow. This has been fascinating, Mark. I really want to say thank you. You know, I know I don't want to keep you too long. I know it's
Cool.
getting late there for you.
Well, that's the peculiar thing about me is, like, if you didn't say that, I'd probably feel like, "Oh, well, I need to keep filling time," and like, "Alright, so let me bring up another thing." So, yes,
I
thank
don't get me
you.
wrong. I enjoy this. I think it was very enlightening and very, this is exactly the routes I
Also,
wanted to
listen,
go.
full transparency for the audience, I haven't really had my life together in the past few weeks, and Rye's been super kind, super patient. We've had to delay this, episode a couple times, so, yeah, I just wanna give you the best episode I can as in that respect,
It was
to make up
fantastic.
for that. So yeah, cool. We could wrap it here, and I'll tell, the audience if they want more about the subject. Obviously, Michael LaFlemme's book, great place to go. And then my Substack, my family thinks I'm crazy.substack.com/, Atlantis deep dive. Actually, don't even try to type the URL and just go straight to my Substack, and you'll find the post pretty easily if you just search Atlantis.
Fantastic, Mark. And of course, everyone can find you at My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. YouTube. Are you on YouTube as well? I think right.
I'm on YouTube, yep,
Yeah,
and
and
I'm gonna
all
make this post on my Substack free for a few weeks or months. I'll probably just forget and it'll stay free. So people can go and read the whole thing. And if you like what I wrote here, subscribe to the Substack because I do post on YouTube, but I have a lot of my videos on Substack now because Substack doesn't strike you if you say no words, whereas YouTube does, and I wanna keep my YouTube going. I haven't posted a lot of stuff there. I'm waiting till I get to 10K subscribers. So support me on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, and once I hit that 10K follower milestone, I'm gonna be putting out basically like a different version of the podcast just for YouTube.
Oh, cool. That is cool. I like that. I like that. Yeah, it's I post to Rumble and to YouTube as well, and I can get away with and sometimes I make special edits just for YouTube, but Rumble gets all the raw material because just let it
Right.
go. Yeah.
Well, Atlantis is not a topic that really, pushes any of their buttons at this point in time. So we should be good with this episode.
Yeah, no, of course, of course. There is a my actually the previous one of the previous episodes I did was with a Luciferian and an ex Luciferian, and I had to make it a little PG,
Right.
for that.
For
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks so
Cool.
much, Mark. Again, I really appreciate this. All right, everyone, I want to say thank you again for spending the time and listening and learning. And that's what we're all doing. We're all here to learn. We're all here to relearn, to unlearn, and to relearn because the truth that we're being given, no. The lies that we're being given as truth are just that. I have a saying that, I can't see the truth because it's concealed by its lies. And that is exactly what it is. They do give us little slivers, they do give us little tidbits of truth, but then they placate us with all these other lies and all these other distractions. Give them bread and give them a circus, and we'll keep them distracted from what the actual truth is. And turn off the TV, turn on, Mark's show, turn on my show, turn on the Awaken podcast, the Eye of Jupiter, and get the truth from us. And even that being said, is don't just believe us. Do your own research. Look into things yourself and find the truth for yourself, because that's what we have to do. We have to be our own arbiters of truth. We have to be our own, gatekeepers, and listen, learn, and decide for yourself. And with that, everyone, I want to say good night. Keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way where? Home. I look forward to our next adventure together as we navigate the mysteries that lie ahead. Until our paths cross again, keep your curiosity wandering and ensure the light remains lit.